Hi, I'm Felix Nyika. I'm from Lilongwe, Malawi, and I live in Lilongwe. I'm a theologian and a pastor. I teach at the Kairos Leadership Institute and Theological Seminary, where I'm also the principal. And I'm also adjunct lecturer at Zeus University, where I'm also part-time researcher with the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, working on African innovations in theology and healing, and I'm also the chairperson for the Theological Society of Malawi. And I'm really happy to be here and to be part of this conversation about decolonization in Malawi and just the way that people see it. And I just want to share my thoughts with you about it. I think the issue of decolonization is really a very important one, and I think for me in the Malawian context, especially in light of our Malawi 2063 vision, which is about what we want to be as a nation come the year 2063. And it has as its kind of like a motto, catchword. It says that we want by the year 2063 to be a nation that is inclusively wealthy and self-reliant, inclusively wealthy and self-reliant. And that's coming in the 58th year of our independence. And I think it's really telling of the coloniality under which we still are existing. And I make a difference between coloniality and colonialism. The colonialism would be actually, a colonial power coming and, um, ensuring that its dominion is felt in a particular presence, whereas coloniality would be more of the structures that come from colonialism still persisting and still to the advantage of the colonizer. And so, in my unpacking of the idea of decolonization, I always start with the coloniality of power or the colonial metrics of power, which is an idea that comes out of Latin America, more from a gentleman called Anibal Cuyano, who basically said that colonialism, especially the colonization that came from Europe, was one that had behind it a racism, a racialization, and he looks at how the idea of manifest destiny, the idea that European peoples or white people are people that God has chosen, that they should be a light to the Gentiles. In the words of Kipling and his White Man's Burden, the idea that the white man has a responsibility to ensure that the rest of humanity, they develop to get to where he actually is as a society, or they actually are as a society. And so, obviously, the manifest destiny has with it, ideas of racism and racial superiority. And with that, of course, when the European powers would go to the rest of the world where they conquered and colonized, there would be a setting up of different kinds of systems. So Quijano speaks of systems of hierarchies, systems of knowledge, and systems of culture. And so, in terms of systems of hierarchies, these would be hierarchies that were racial based, and it would be that in that racial hierarchy, the highest would be white people, Europeans, and then would come, at least in the context of Southern Africa, would come Indians, and would come after that colored people of mixed race, and then would come Africans. And so it was very racialized and stratified in that way. But also at the very same time, it was also capitalized. That at the heart of this was the idea of capital accumulating things. And so in typical colonial enterprises, there would be the extraction of resources from a place, and then you take those resources to get processed in Europe, and then they are brought back and sold at exploitative prices. And so that too, I think, in terms of Malawi, is something that we can say was inbuilt into the beginning of Malawi, because if you remember, David Livingstone is the one that spoke of the three C's: Christianity, commerce, and civilization. And his dream was actually to find a place in the interior of Africa where there would be, settler community, where there would be the growing of cotton, and then after the cotton is grown, then it is taken to Scotland or Great Britain, where it is processed and comes back into Nyasaland or Malawi, where the wares are sold. And so just that idea, you extract resources from here, you process them elsewhere, and then you bring them back here again. And so one can actually say that that civilizing mission, at its heart, was also a colonizing mission, right? And so, in terms of systems of hierarchies, you have racialized systems, you have capitalized systems or capitalistic systems, and of course, in that system, the African, the black person would be the labor, because these would be labor-intensive enterprises. And so, again, I think if we look at the history of the construction of race as we know it today, of whiteness and blackness as we know them today, at its heart was actually the fact that black people were inferior and so could only be used for labor. And so the American slave trade system, for example, was really about that. It was about the racialization, seeing somebody's skin color to be what determines their value. But at its heart was to have a labor force, And so again, we can also say that in terms of the Malawian context, we see that too. That the idea that when the settlers come here, who's going to work on the farms? It's going to be these African people that are going to be working the farms. And then also, of course, it was genderized in the sense that women had a lower place than men, and so it was patriarchal. It was men being dominating. And I guess for the Malawian experience, a good example is a Blantyre mission, the early Blantyre mission. One of the missionaries there, Alexander Hathaway, told the story of Blantyre mission, and never mentioned his wife, who was a medical doctor and had preceded him in terms of coming to the mission. And so, genderized like that. Now, we can say for Malawian society, especially say Chewa society, there was a little bit more space for women. Professor Isabella Paopiri speaks of how the Dutch Reformed Church, when they came to the central region of Malawi, because they are patriarchal, women are not allowed to be, to be to be elders and things like those, positions of authority like those. She says that the space that women had in traditional society, where they could be chiefs, where they could be like prophetesses, like Makewana, for example, that space became smaller and smaller. And so that's part of the colonial construct in terms of the hierarchies of power, that it would be genderized, it would be racialized, and it would be capitalistic or capitalized. And also another system that Quijano speaks of is a system of knowledge systems, where the superior knowledge, of the perceived superior knowledge of Westerners in Europe, would be the one that would be taken to be, the only knowledge. And this was not just knowledge that had space for other knowledges, but, it was knowledge understood in a universal sense that, there's no other knowledge, this is the knowledge. And so, in areas like, say, health and healing, where Malawians would have had traditional healers and all, and not all of them, were like so-called witch doctors. But they too would have been kind of like rubbished. I mean, the traditional herbal concoctions that may have helped on all sorts of different ailments, but when the mission came, then that was taken to be, no, that's not really important. Ways of knowing that we're African, where the African understanding is that the world is not just what we see. It's not just naturalistic. But also that there's an interface between the natural and the supernatural, right? Even that was kind of like rubbish, and there was no space for that. And so issues like, say, ufiti or witchcraft, issues like dreams, were not things that were taken to be sources of knowledge, or things that could be had space in the modernist understanding of reality. And so schooling comes in and replaces traditional ways of knowing. Malawian Christians try and incorporate some traditional ways into that, but by and large, much of that is taken to be like not really important. And another important thing is the idea of epistemic violence, that is knowledge violence, where others have argued that that is the basis for all colonialism. That there must be, a colonial mindset that is set in the colonized, and so that the colonized are governable, and that the colonial enterprise can go on as it should. And so that also we can say, resulted in an internalized racism, where you have people of African descent or Malawians that have come at a place where they think that things that are from the West, things that are from Europe, things that are not Malawian are superior to their own things, because there's been this internalized racism, and also that flows into cultures as well, into systems of culture, where the mode of dress, when it is European, it is better than the traditional mode of dress that is Malawian. Where again that internalized racism gets people to come to the place where when they see good things, those things are Zachizungu or European, and when things are not as they should be, or they have a lesser quality, then Zachikuda. So a dog that looks, well taken care of and healthy, that dog is Galu Wachizungu. And when the dog is, scrawny and not very well taken care of, then that dog is Wachikuda, right? And so there has been this internalized racism, where things that are African, things that are Malawian, are not seen as good things, but things that are coming from elsewhere, right? And so that is a colonial matrix of power. I think behind it are the systems of hierarchies, systems of knowledge, and systems of cultures. Now, I would say that looking back, remember I started off with our vision, Malawi 2063, saying that we would like to be an inclusively wealthy and self-reliant nation, and this we're saying 58 years after our independence. And I said that that's really telling of the state of coloniality that we're in. So I would say that when we unpack those systems today, those systems are still with us today. So, for example, in terms of like a racialized hierarchy, I think it's still there. I know in some international NGOs that when the very same job is being done by Malawian, they won't get the very same amount of money. When the Malawian, or maybe there may actually be some positions that they would ensure that they get somebody that is not Malawian, that somebody is an expatriate and not somebody that is Malawian, even though there would be Malawians that would, very ably be able to do that job. So you have systems like those, racialized systems, and I think for Malawian society as well, if we're talking about, being inclusively wealthy in 2063, it means that there's a lot of exclusion, and that exclusion, one can argue that if you go back in history, that it's the coming of colonialism that brought in all these class structures and vast differences in the way that people experience life, in terms of others having more and others having less, right? And so I would say that maybe if we go back to our time of independence, maybe we never factor that into the equation. That okay, so what are we being independent from? What system are we being independent from? And so that if we did that, then today we would have looked back to 58 years of trying to be inclusive, of trying to have everybody be a part of the nation. And again, with those systems of hierarchies, racialized, capitalized, and genderized, women having not that much space in society today as they would have, opportunities today as they would have in a more traditional society. So I see that there's that continuation up until today. And just talking about the racialized hierarchy, just about a month or so ago, there was a CEO of a very big international company that was arrested because he had like 59 trees of marijuana in his backyard, and about 43 something, or is it 43 kgs of marijuana that was confiscated. He went to court and he was charged 1 million kwacha and given a non-custodial sentence of 12 months. About 3 4 months, 3 4 weeks later, a young person, age 19, his name I think is Musa John, and he was found in this house and in Lilongwe, and there were like 170 something bags of of marijuana, and he's 19. Probably he didn't move all that by himself. If he did, because his mother claims that he was just visiting a friend's house. It wasn't even his house. But to cut a long story short, Musa John got an 8-year custodial sentence for being found in possession of marijuana, and yet the other expatriate guy, I guess he has money, he's European, just got away with 1 million kwacha, probably change for him, and non-custodial sentence, right? And so I would say that it's still there, right? It's still there. In terms of knowledge systems, I think we still privilege Western knowledge systems. I think when ideas are coming from the West, there are ideas that are seen to be more beneficial. When Nzungu says something, then that is supposed to be more helpful than even something that would be homegrown here. Um, that of course speaks also into systems of culture and modes of dressing and all sorts of things like those. That there's always the centering of things that are European as opposed to things that are Malawian and African. And I say all this so that I think in the partnerships that are there between Malawians and people from Scotland, that there would be this appreciation of where the Malawian is in terms of the epistemic violence. I think we have not really as a nation unpacked our colonial experience and really come at a point where we say, okay, but that those things need to change, and that many of us actually operate from a more internalized racism where we believe we're inferior to other people. And so that definitely has an effect in the ways in which we interact and partner with others. And so I would think that that may come off as okay. I think the idea that is coming from the white person from the West is a better idea than our idea, or maybe even coming at a point where when you already see that somebody from the West has an agenda or has a way of doing this that they want to push to the exclusion of what you may want to you may think as an indigenous person that this is the better way of doing it. That one may shrink back because hey, not only are they white, but they also are bringing the money, And I think that these asymmetrical power relations, are the spaces where the colonization or coloniality still continues. And so to decolonize, I really feel that there must be an appreciation of that. I think there must be an appreciation from the European, the Western, Scottish end, that our the way that we have interacted structurally, not just as individuals. I think there's a lot of nice individuals, but at times the structures that we're operating under, are those that make already are wired in such a way that things that are Western, people from the West have an upper hand, right? And so I think it's to be cognizant of that fact that there are systems that privilege those that are from the West, those that are white, and that the voices of those that are from Malawi, from Africa, from the non-Western world, are voices that are not listened to, right? And I really applaud this initiative because it's an initiative that is showing that there are people in SMP that really are saying, how can we do this right? And I think that's a way to go when we can have spaces like these where we can interact with each other, where we can hear each other not on just the basis of power and money and things like those, but on the basis of what we call Ubuntu, that you are another person just like me, and the things that I aspire to, probably there are some things that you aspire to, And so when we come on that common ground of Ubuntu, humanity, then we make the world a better place. But historically, what's gone on in terms of relations between the West and the rest, the West and Malawi and Africa, has really been one of exploitation and or maybe asymmetrical power relations. And so that at times we forget and we think that, well, but these are not the days of empire, these are not the days of colonialism, but that coloniality still goes on in these different ways. Yeah, I hope my thoughts are going to spur some thinking and some dialogue. And thank you very much to SMP and David for giving me this opportunity that I can air my thoughts in this area. Thank you very much. God bless you. Mbuya kudalitseni. Zikomo.